this is not a problem that's down the road. This is not an issue for our great-great-grandchildren. It's not an issue for people who live a long, long way away from us. It's not an issue for polar bears. It's an issue for us right here and right now.
Welcome to a special Earth Month podcast with ES Solar. Today we have special guest. We have Dr. Dan Bedford. He is a distinguished geography professor on climate science at Weber State University. So welcome, Dr. Dan.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And we also have the CEO of ES Solar, Jeff Diamond, and the Vice President of Sales, Zach Randall. All right, well, welcome everyone. We are super excited to be here and have Dr. Dan with us today. Could you just tell us a little bit about your background and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I work in the area of climate science. I teach classes on climate science. I conduct research. I'm currently working on a project to measure and map how hot it gets around Ogden. As temperatures are increasing, we're experiencing more and more heat waves. Then that's what I'm working on right now. So I'm in the field of climate science, climate change, working with students, working with the community to map and measure this stuff.
And how long have you been at Weber State University?
I've been at Weber State for just over 20 years. Okay.
And with solar, how does the benefit of solar help the environment with the climate change?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So the fundamental cause of the climate changes that we're experiencing is increasing levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and other greenhouse gases. There's other things too, but the fundamental cause is increased greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. There's really basically no debate in the scientific community about that. We know what's going on. We know that CO2 levels are going up. We know that temperatures are going up, and we know that those two things are related. We also know why the CO2 levels are going up, for reasons that we could get into if you're interested. But we know that the CO2 levels are going up because we're burning fossil fuels. So if we scale down our burning of fossil fuels and switch to renewable energy, then that's going to mitigate the problem. We're at a point now where we also have to start thinking about reducing the level of CO2 in the atmosphere, not just not putting so much CO2 in, but actively taking it out. That's a whole other, much more complicated technical challenge. But the basic idea is if we can switch to renewable energy, get away from fossil fuels, the more we can do that, the better, then that's going to mitigate the problem.
What are steps we can do to reduce it?
Yeah. Again, the fundamental bottom line is the more we can do to reduce our consumption of fossil fuels, the better. So if we are driving less, being more thoughtful about the journeys that we take, this idea of what's called trip chaining. If you need to go to the store, but you also need to go to the gym, don't go out to the store, come back, and then go out to the gym. Just do one and then the next. If you can carpool, that's great. If you can use public transit, that's great. Ride a bike, maybe even, although sometimes that can be potentially hazardous. Right. We don't have the bike infrastructure quite so well laid out as we might like, but it's getting better. So the more we can do to reduce our consumption of energy generally, and especially our consumption of fossil fuels, the better. That can include things like rooftop solar, which more and more people are getting rooftop solar. We have rooftop solar with a different company, but we have it, and it's brought our electricity bills way down. So it's a good thing.
I've got a question. So from what we're seeing right now, there's a transition in the industry from solar to solar plus storage. Mm-hmm. I know that's a big deal for consumers because they've always wanted the battery backup. Mm-hmm. We actually had Rocky Mountain Power on the show 6 months or so ago, and they said that's actually been very, very helpful for the pollutants as well, because the sun goes down eventually and we still have power, right? And so maybe you can speak a little bit about, what effect that would maybe have with climate change as well, because we all know it helps with pollution, but what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, this is getting into the energy engineering aspect of things, which is less my area of expertise. But so take this with a little bit of a pinch of salt. But my understanding of the situation is that when we've got all these rooftop solar systems, what that tends to do is when the sun comes out during the day, like you're saying, is that it floods the grid with all this cheap energy, and there's way more of it than can actually be used. So what do you do with it all? And then the sun goes down, and you've got this problem because everybody still needs electricity. So storage is really the issue. I've heard people describe the situation as we don't have an energy problem so much as we have an energy storage problem. And I hear, again, this is very informally, I hear the experts talking about this as saying that fundamentally when you get solar panels on your roof now, that the advice is very strongly you've got to get solar plus storage. So we haven't gone that way yet. We're far enough back with our own house. We got the solar panels 2015 or 16, I think. So it's nearly 10 years ago, and we don't have battery storage. But that would be the next thing to look into.
Yeah. And that's kind of what we've seen as a company is we used to think Rocky Mountain Power didn't care about renewable energy, but the more we've learned, it's actually what you said. They more care about, if we're going to do renewable energy, we need a storage aspect to it so that we can actually use the energy when needed.
Yep.
And so that's kind of the wave that we're seeing right now in Utah, which is cool.
Yeah. Renewable energy is great, except when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow, and then you've got a problem because it's not going to do it all the time. But there are smart ways around it, and battery storage is improving, as I understand it, by leaps and bounds. The technology is improving, so it's becoming more of an option.
Yeah, I think the idea, I mean, the brilliant part of batteries is you have expensive peaker plants that are kind of more easily ramped up at any given time when you need them. You have baseload plants that are generally cleaner, and the more batteries you have on a grid, the bigger that hive of batteries gets, the less you have to depend on those dirty peaker plants to supply energy at 5 p.m. People come home, they turn maybe they plug their EV in and they turn their AC down to a comfortable, maybe from 75 to 70. Mm-hmm. We use a lot of energy, and instead of pinging those peaker plants, we just ping our battery. I mean, that's the idea that Rocky Mountain Power is trying to, I think, promote with batteries. So, and it makes sense on a level of the climate, debacle as well. So
yeah, something interesting, just so you know, because Rocky Mountain came in and they said there's obviously air quality is an issue in Utah, and they said the two main causes. Number one is vehicles.
Yep.
Right. I mean, we live in a bowl. We're driving cars that burn gasoline, and that's number one. Number two, they said, was home consumption, and they said the nice thing about adding solar and storage is you're producing, storing, and using clean energy from the sun right there at your home, rather than, like Jeff said, having to rely more. But anyway, that's kind of the transition we're seeing, at least in Utah.
Yeah, right. And the transmission losses you don't have too.
Exactly.
So, it's interesting you brought up the vehicle impacts on air pollution. I was telling Kevin, I drove my electric vehicle over here this morning to get here, and couldn't find a place to plug in. I was very impressed to see just how many electric vehicle charging points you had at the building, and I thought, oh yeah, right, it's a solar panel company, they're going to have charging points, but they're all full. And this is the problem that I have in a number of other contexts too when I drive up to work on campus. There's lots of charging points, but it used to be easy to find a place to plug in. Now it's much, much harder. And although in the short run my immediate reaction is, darn it, I want to just be able to park where I want to park, and I have to drive all over the place to find a place to plug in. But my long-term reaction is, this is a really good thing, because what it means is we've got way more electric vehicles on the road.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's good for air quality, and it's also good for the carbon emissions problem. In order to resolve the climate change issue, we have to scale down fairly dramatically our consumption of fossil fuels. We can't keep putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. I mean, the other option is to capture the carbon at source. That would be a way that you could continue to use fossil fuels if you could capture the carbon at source. That's much more difficult to do at scale, as far as I understand it. This is, again, not my area of expertise. My area of expertise is the climate science rather than the engineering aspects. But the obvious pathway forward right now is with renewable energy, but it presents its own challenges. As you guys are saying, it presents its own challenges in the sense of what do you do when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing? What do you do at night? What do you do on windy or rainy days when you don't have the solar panels generating electricity? So there's issues that you still have to potentially address.
I find it encouraging. We live in Utah, very not politically, not to get political or anything, but like, I think our customers here are pretty smart. Mm-hmm. I think they understand the challenges that renewable energy faces. And I think everyone's always said, well, hey, we'll be ready for it when the technology's there. One thing that's really encouraging, especially working with our local utility here, is they're fully committed to be, I don't remember what year, but fully committed to be 100% renewable by like 2050, I want to say.
Yeah, I think it is 2050.
And they are, just like Weber State University, light years ahead of the competition, but they're doing it in a smart way. They're not just focusing on one thing, just putting solar on everything. They're actually saying, okay, we need to find the balance. We need to do solar, but we need to do nuclear. We need to do other things as well. Mm-hmm. And I feel like the technology's finally caught up to the point where it's actually something that's doable. And we're starting to see that with our customers. So just so you know, we're installing hundreds of batteries in Utah a week to existing solar, and that's in a partnership with Rocky Mountain Power. Rocky Mountain Power is giving rebates. They're doing whatever they can to incentivize customers to what they call firm up the grid, to be more self-reliant, store their own renewable energy, use their own renewable energy. And it's putting Utah's grid light years ahead of the other states. And so they're kind of a little shining city on it. I guess Rocky Mountain's done a really good job. I think ES Solar's done a good job. And our customers here in Utah are very smart. And they understand that it's not a want, it's more of a need. We need to do it. So,
and it impacts the bottom line. Right? I mean, this is what we've found since we got solar on our roof, is that the electricity bills come way down. So it's going to affect how much you pay out of pocket to run your house, run the electricity, and so on. So it just makes a lot of sense financially and as well as environmentally. So it's a wonderful example of a win-win situation. It just makes sense financially, but it also is doing the right thing for the environment. And for the world. Honestly, I have two children. I have an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old, and I think about what's the world going to be like when they are my age or older. And we're already committed to seeing fairly substantial climate changes, but let's do everything we can to make sure they don't get any worse. There's sometimes you hear us talk about the target of keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial, which is about a little bit less than 3 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels. We've already warmed by about 1.1, 1.2 degrees Celsius, or about roughly 2 degrees Fahrenheit towards that goal. And people sometimes say, well, there's no chance. We're never going to make 1.5 degrees Celsius. It's never going to happen. Okay, maybe it's not. But I would sure rather live in a place that has 1.6 or 1.7 degrees warming than 3 or 4 degrees Celsius warming. So we've got to work towards every little bit of warming avoided. That's all good.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny that you use win-win. We ran out of scenarios after about our third win. It's like this has been a perfect storm of, let me back up a little bit. In solar, solar and utility it's like oil and vinegar, right? In general, one fights the other in some regard. But in this scenario, it's been a perfect storm of everybody working together, right? We're ready to install batteries. We didn't resist. It's not easy. It's really not easy to be. It's a lot easier to be a solar company just, slapping glass on roofs than it is to actually integrate the battery, have it work, have it talk to the grid. And so it was kind of this perfect storm of a win-win-win. We were ready for it. We were ready to do it. The utility was ready to accept, the challenge of having the battery actually talk to the grid and have it affect transmission and that thing. And then you've got the customer that wins as well because of, financial or maybe other reasons. I mean, there's more reasons to go solar than just, money or helping the climate or, there's other intangibles that fall in there. So it's interesting to hear you say win-win because we think the same way. We think it's been a very positive movement in the energy industry altogether.
Jeff's right. We've always fought, it felt like, the utility. And then now that we've learned more about the grid sciences and what the utility really wants, because they love the idea of renewable energy. The utility does. What they don't love about it is the time of day, like you said, the time of day it's produced. It can't all be, it's wasted a lot of times. So finally the technology's there to where we can actually use the renewable energy at a time that's needed, and that's what the battery does. And then it gives customers self-reliance. They have power when the power goes out, which is, so it's the first time in my career, I've done this for over a decade, that it's a win-win-win. It's the customer winning.
Yep.
They get what they've always wanted, because that's always been something that people have been interested in.
They assume they're getting a battery.
Yeah, they assume that it's going to work when the power goes out.
Yeah. Then you had to explain why
exactly.
It made sense at that time. It does now.
And then the utility wins, and they say, hey, this is actually, they're putting a lot of money behind this. They're like, this is the future. This is how we electrify the grid. And what's cool is it's happening right here in Utah, which is, it's unbelievable to our battery partners, to Rocky Mountain Power, that we're the ones leading the way, and not maybe another state like California who's kind of led the way in solar installs. But pretty cool. And it's good to hear from someone that knows the science behind it, but it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting, this point you made about utilities and solar kind of fighting each other, and how that's shifted. And I think that's often the case with climate issues, actually, is that unfortunately, and for reasons I have ideas about but don't really know, the whole issue of climate change has become quite politicized, and I think that's unnecessary. But often what happens, in my experience, has been, once you start talking to each other, even though you may be coming at the issue from different sides, once you recognize that you understand where each person is coming from, then often you can get these really creative solutions. Yeah. So it's encouraging to hear that that's basically what's happened with you guys and talking with Rocky Mountain Power.
Yeah. I think Rocky Mountain Power really was able to learn from other states. Maybe I don't want to even call them shortcomings. I mean, because a certain amount of solar on the grid is a good thing. It just gets to a point when it's too much, right? I mean, you can go into a state or a city with 0% adoption in solar, and up until a certain point, it's okay putting those loads onto the grid, just a straight. But it gets to a point where there's too much inflow, and it just goes to ground, and there's a problem, which is where the battery comes in. And Rocky Mountain Power was, fortunately for them, able to learn from other states that had maybe met those downfalls earlier, and was able to start with a clean slate and do it right the first time. So.
Very innovative, which is cool.
Yeah, which is crazy, because a lot of people call them kind of a
dinosaur,
old school, vertically integrated, kind of a dying breed utility, but really they're leading the charge in a lot of different areas.
I think Utah is especially interesting. I'm not from around here originally. As you can probably tell, I'm from London, but I've been living here for over 20 years, and my wife grew up in Salt Lake. In fact, my mother-in-law's family have very, very deep Utah roots. I think my great-grandmother-in-law lived in Fort Buenaventura in Ogden when it was one of the original homesteads. Anyway, so I have a tremendous affection for Utah, even though I'm not from here originally. And what I hear, there's a very interesting gentleman. He works with he's founded a non-profit. The idea is essentially to talk about climate change from a free market perspective, and to try and take the politics out of it, and to really try and look at it as an economic issue and why it makes sense. He used to be a Republican congressman from South Carolina. I think his name is Bob Inglis, and he came to Weber State recently. He travels around giving talks about the work that he's doing, and he was on the Weber State campus a year or so ago, and he was saying that Utah is a really, really interesting case because of the ways in which smart solutions tend to kind of percolate up. That although Utah has this reputation as being a conservative state, that things that the sort of conservative liberal split isn't quite as straightforward and obvious in Utah as it might be in other places. People talk about the Utah way. I'm thinking about homelessness or immigration as being a couple of examples, and it's interesting to see how smart solutions can kind of go past the politics, and you can put those issues to one side and just find the things that make sense.
And that's exactly what's happening. Like, that's what's so encouraging to me, is we're seeing it with customers, where it doesn't matter what side of the political aisle they're on. They all know that it makes sense to get energy from the sun if we can. Right. It's a better way to get energy, but they also know that there's challenges with it, and that's why I say it's been an awesome awesome light bulb moment that we've had the last couple of years. Because we, just so you know, you might not know this, but ES Solar was the very first solar company in the country to we went to like a 98% battery adoption rate in 2020, kind of because we had to, because Rocky Mountain Power started discouraging solar installs without a battery.
Yep.
So we did it just to survive, but then we also started listening to Rocky Mountain Power and listening to their perspective. And then we're able to take that to a customer and educate them. And a light bulb moment goes off. We're like, this makes sense. If we're going to really go to renewable energy 100%, how do we do it? Oh, this makes sense. We can actually put a solar plant on our roof. We can put a battery in our living room, or in our garage, I guess, not the living room. And we can be our own virtual power plant is what we call it. And so it's been pretty neat to watch, and it gives us hope that we're making progress at least.
Yeah, I think this has been a surprise. You know, like there were a number of news stories I saw in the wake of things like hurricanes and so forth. And people think that because they have solar on their roof, I'm fine, I'm independent of the grid, but not so much unless you've got battery storage, and then you are, or can be, I guess, right? But in the absence of that you're just feeding the power into the grid, and you're still dependent on the grid. So the battery storage piece is going to be critical.
And you wrote a book on climate change too. Did you want to tell us a little bit about the book and what it's about?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's a textbook actually, and I co-wrote it with a friend and colleague. He's actually in Australia. He's now become a widely recognized expert in the science of misinformation and misconceptions, why people misunderstand things, or how does misleading information work to mislead us, which at the time we worked on the book, we were concerned about it, but now it's just like everywhere. The idea of AIs and deep fakes and all that kind of thing, putting misinformation out and trying to kind of tip the balance in elections and so forth by various different organizations and outfits and individuals trying to do that. So we saw that there was quite a lot of misinformation in the climate science space, and so we worked to think about how can you learn about climate change while at the same time recognizing what is and is not reliable information. So I drew on his expertise. His name is John Cook. Drew on his expertise as a cognitive psychologist and brought my climate change expertise to the table, and together we put this book together, looking at just as a primer essentially on climate change. It was targeted at an intro level college audience, possibly high school, seniors in high school, but really the goal was an intro level college class audience. So yeah, that came out, when did it come out? 2016, I think. So it's a bit old now, and the climate science has moved on. Not all in good ways, but in some good ways. There is some good news with regard to the directions that we're going. There's also a lot of bad news. It's easy to get wrapped up in all the bad news, and forget about the good news. But so we just got a call from the publisher to work on a second edition, which we had to weigh the pros and cons of doing that, and eventually said yes, okay, we'll work on the second edition. So that should be coming out in 2025, or at least get to the publishers in 2025, and then they'll have to print it. I guess they do still make physical books these days. So that's the nature of the book. Yeah. On the plus side, and this, again, back to the solar issue, I was looking at some data recently about the relationship between economic growth and carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions, actually not just carbon, but greenhouse gas emissions generally. And what we see happening now, particularly in rich countries, certainly in the US, also in many European countries, is that the economy continues to grow and the greenhouse gas emissions are coming down. And that's really encouraging news. That means that we've essentially, the phrasing that I've seen used is decoupled the economy, growth of the economy from greenhouse gas emissions. And that's really, really encouraging news. Now, let's not get carried away, because it's not all great news, because just because the greenhouse gas emissions are coming down doesn't mean they're zero. We're still putting carbon into the atmosphere faster than it can be taken out. So we're going in the right direction. Whether we're going in that direction fast enough and soon enough, that's another story. but we are at least going in the right direction. So if you're a glass half full kind of person, this is great. If you're a glass half empty kind of person, it's like, well, okay, that's great and all, but we should have been here 20 years ago. We're not going fast enough, etc. All of which is true, both glass half full and glass half empty. According to the National Weather Service, the Salt Lake City measurements out at the airport, the 9 of the 10 hottest years on record in Salt Lake, measured at that particular station, have been since 2014. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty striking. The one outlier is 1934. Otherwise, all of the 10 hottest years on record, with that one exception, the other 9, have all been since 2014. Heat waves appear to be getting worse. So this is interesting because in 2022, we had a really hot summer, and we saw a lot of days over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, 95 degrees Fahrenheit, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's pretty clear that not only is the world getting warmer, not everywhere in the world is warming up at the same rate. There are 1 or 2 places even cooling down, but the world as a whole very clearly getting warmer, and that's also true here in Utah. And that's got impacts down the road, right? We're seeing less of our precipitation accumulating in the mountains as snow. So the free of charge water storage that we used to rely on, we don't have that so much anymore. Because we're getting more rain, it's going to reservoirs. Are we going to be in a position to manage the changed water regime that we're going to have in the future? So we've got to worry about those kinds of things, and that's going to cost money. We've got to worry about our own health during these heat waves. Not everybody has access to air conditioning. Some parts of cities get hotter than others, and it's typically low-income people that are exposed to the worst of the extreme heat. And those are the folks who are least able to run the air conditioning. Right? So provision of adequate electrical power to everybody is going to be really critical for getting us through this. And people die in extreme heat. There was a study just published recently looking at Europe. Europe had extreme heat in 2022 as well. And they estimate in this study that something like 61,000 people died from causes directly attributable to the extreme heat that was experienced in the heat waves of summer 2022. So, this is not a problem that's down the road. This is not an issue for our great-great-grandchildren. It's not an issue for people who live a long, long way away from us. It's not an issue for polar bears. It's an issue for us right here and right now. So the more we can do, and there's lots of things that people can do. Often people feel disempowered. It's like, this is so huge, I can't do anything. And I understand that feeling. But reducing our own individual consumption of energy is great. Switching to clean energy is great. Making great use of public transport is really important. All of these things, there are things that we can do. So the expression that's sometimes used is the antidote to anxiety is action. So if you're feeling freaked out about climate change, there are things that you can do. And there's any number of websites that people can go to. And meetings and events that are held regularly. I know this podcast won't go out until Earth Day, by which time the Weber State Intermountain Sustainability Summit will be finished, but it happens every year. And there's a lot of great experts, clean energy providers, energy efficiency folks who are there providing practical advice for people for things that you can actually do to reduce the impact that we're having on the climate.
Like I say, we have smart customers here in Utah, and exactly what you're saying. They get it. They know that, dirty air is a big problem here. They know that they want to do their part, and it makes sense with what the products that we're offering now, and the technology's finally caught up to where we can actually solve some issues. And like I say, Jeff was just said it perfectly. It's the first time in my career that it's been a win-win-win for customers, for us, and for the utility company, and for the earth and everything else. So I'm a glass half full type of person for sure. I see the progress, I see the change, and I feel like we're just in the beginning phases of what's happening. So
make every day Earth Day and do what we can and take action. So thank you very much, Dr. Dan, for coming and talking to us and telling us about climate change and what we can do, and solar and how it will be beneficial for the environment. Thank you, Jeff, for coming and putting your words, and Zach. It's great to have you on the show again. Looking forward to future podcasts with you. So thank you all for listening to our podcast today. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned for future podcasts. Remember, happy Earth Day and happy Earth Month, and protect the environment with renewable energy.